Hello there everybody, Sam's Trains here, welcome back to the railway and welcome to another review. So far this year I have reviewed quite a few engines from outside the UK, and this time I'm certainly continuing that trend because today's loco is Swiss. No, God no, can't be doing with that. Just roll the usual music. I've only ever reviewed one locomotive from manufacturer Liliput before, and you might remember it was that absolutely tiny little rail bus thing. Now I remember two main things about that model. First of all, the performance was absolutely excellent. It ran just like a Swiss watch, if you will. The second thing I remember is that at its full price it was ludicrously expensive, to the tune of £149.90. Well, today's locomotive is also made by Liliput, which is a Bachmann brand, by the way, and the loco is this. It is the SBB B3/4, or more simply, it is a 260 or mogul steam locomotive from Switzerland. Now, hopefully this will be like the railcar thing in that it runs like a Swiss watch. We'll find out later. But I already know that the full RRP for this is equally outrageous. So these start on Bachmann's website at £357.95, which is more or less double what I would expect to pay for a loco of this sort of size from Bachmann normally. However, very fortunately, I didn't pay that amount of money, and of course I didn't, because I wouldn't be reviewing it if that was the only option. I actually bought this from TMC, the model centre, for £180, which is obviously much cheaper, but actually I would consider that to be about right for a Bachmann loco of this size. However, it isn't a Bachmann loco. I mean, it's a Bachmann brand, but Liliput is not the same as Bachmann branch line. So hopefully we will see a bit of a step up in terms of the quality and the features, and hopefully we'll be able to understand why this is so much more expensive normally than Bachmann's usual locomotives. But other than that, this is a completely new experience for me, a Swiss steam locomotive. Looking at the photos, it looks absolutely gorgeous, so I cannot wait to get into this thing and find a bit more out about it. So let's do this together, follow me. So this really is foreign territory to me. I have never reviewed a locomotive from Switzerland before, so that should be very interesting. But also during my research for this video, I was able to find precious little information about these locos. It really was just a handful of photos and the same couple of paragraphs of brief information. So I'm hoping to learn a lot more about this model from the model itself, and also from hopefully the paperwork that is contained within. First though, let me show you the end of the box so you can see exactly what I've got. So my product code is L131950. It is HO scale, so slightly smaller in scale, but of course it works on 00 track. In order to avoid being offensive, I won't try to pronounce that word, but it ends with locomotive. It is B3/4, that is the class. It is locomotive number 1359, SBB, talk more about that later on, and Epoch 1. And I'm not entirely sure how the era system works over in Europe, but it's from the early 1900s. That's what you need to know. I'm hoping that this isn't just going to be a big mystery, because normally on a Bachmann box you would get a history of the loco, maybe some images. Yeah, nothing like that on this box. So hopefully everything I need to know is going to be inside. So with that, I'm going to start getting into this thing. Got to say, it is quite a small loco, given how ridiculously expensive it is, and it's not particularly heavy, but I'm hoping that this thing is just heavy enough to mean that the loco is die-cast. That at least would be a good way to help justify, not entirely, but to help justify that insane price. Okay, let's pull this thing out. I'm already loving how tiny this loco is. Yeah, I think this is gonna be my cup of tea, if it's good quality. Okay, so this is looking good. I've got quite a wodge of paperwork here. So, not looking too good to start with. We've got what looks like a loco history and an explanation on how to open the packaging, which is straightforward, but it's not in English. So let's skip through here a little bit. Ah, yes. Okay, information on the original. So there you have a brief history. It is very, very brief, unfortunately, but yeah, it gives you some idea of what these things were about. Getting started, okay, this is handy then. So we've got, yeah, removing the blister, nothing unusual there. Operation on curved track, minimum curve radius is 356 millimeters. I forget now what radius that is, but hopefully it'll be okay on second. Servicing and care. Serviced at regular intervals. Okay, it says you can do it without opening up the model. Yeah, that's all pretty standard. There's a diagram over the page which shows the oiling points, quite a lot of them, although it is just the axles, it looks like, not even the valve gear. There is a diagram of the innards there which shows a fairly substantial looking motor with a flywheel, which is good. Shows the location of the DCC socket, looks like a 21 pin inside the tender. Incidentally, no idea whether this is DCC fitted or not. It didn't say it was on the box, it didn't say either way. And then we've got some information about the AC version of the model. Hopefully I have not got an AC version of this model, I don't think so. It's for 3 rail, so I guess that's easy enough to check. No, I can't see a pickup shoe for a 3rd rail, so hopefully we're okay with that. And I think that is basically about it as far as the interesting info goes. But there's another booklet. This one's shorter, you'll be glad to hear. Okay, so this is like a list of the parts. So you get a better look at the chassis there, the body, which does seem to be quite detailed. All of the part numbers listed and a few other parts as well. There's the motor with its flywheel, so that's a good sign. Yeah, it's quite an interesting little diagram there. Shows every part of the model. But that pales into insignificance compared with the Loco herself. So let's start taking a look then. I didn't see a section on fitting the accessories, and good Lord above, I think I've just realised something here. What? So this looks like a sachet of black powder. Usually this would be very, very concerning, but I think in this case this is probably coal for the tender. What a very, very strange idea. Yeah, so you can fit real coal to the tender. What is actually in the tender at the moment then? I have no idea, but I have never ever seen that before. And hopefully this stuff is safe inside this bag, because it's going to make a huge mess if not. Alright, that's a first. That is another first in today's video. What else have we got? Not a great deal inside here. Looks like some pipes. Some of them still on a sprue. Yeah, looks fairly straightforward, doesn't it? And probably some sort of housing for a speaker or something. Well, I'm going to put that back on here for safekeeping. Bear in mind, this is, you know, an almost £400 model at RRP, so I'm going to have to be extra careful with this one. And let's take our first look. Wow, so this thing looks to be extremely detailed. Straight away, I can see a lot of separately fitted parts on this thing. Ooh, I'm a bit worried about lifting this up, actually. It's going to be fragile, isn't it? And I've got to say, the boiler looks as though it's made of metal. It's got a pretty good finish on it, either way. So let's lift it out, and let's find out. Are they connected? All right, no, so I'll lift the Loco on its own to begin with for you. Okay, so there it is. As you can see, this thing is absolutely lovely, isn't it? The level of detail is insane. It's also dirty. It's really sort of dusty and messy. This was bought brand new from TMC, and I trust they haven't sort of had it out running around the shop or anything. So presumably this is dirty like this from the factory. Maybe it was quite slow in its assembly, perhaps, and the parts had been left out to gather dust for a while. I don't know, but I'm a bit nervous about cleaning this, because obviously a brush is going to damage these details, but we'll cross that bridge later on. Yes, it does have a die-cast boiler, which is fantastic. I think the running plate and the cab and such, those are all made of plastic, but they look good and straight. But yeah, actually for its size, I would say the weight here is pretty decent. But I did notice that the tender itself seems quite heavy as well. So let's find out what's going on with that. Yeah, to say this is such a small tender, it does seem to be fairly heavy. So we've got quite a bit of oil visible on the bottom. So we can also consider the tender dirty as well, but in a slightly different way. It does have coal fitted to it, which is a good sign, because I did not want to have to faff about with that sachet of black powder. And it also appears to have lights on it as well, so we'll have to find out whether they work. I assume they probably do. And then underneath, you've got this very interesting and overly conspicuous, I would say, coupling interface between loco and tender. It really is just 6 pins which connect the loco and tender together. There is no other securing clip or anything, literally just the electrical contacts that couple the two together. Not sure I'm dreadfully impressed by that, but I guess if there was a sort of clipping mechanism, then the drawbar would be even more conspicuous. And frankly, if it was any chunkier and more conspicuous, then they could probably use this on real locomotives at full scale. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. Right, so I'll get these weighed, I will plug them together and probably keep them there, maybe. And then we'll take a much closer look at the level of detail, which does look to be extremely good. I'm actually really looking forward to this now. But first, here's a bit of history on these locomotives in real life. The Swiss Federal Railway goes by several different acronyms. It goes by the SBB, the CFF and the FFS, which stands for the same name but in German, French and Italian respectively. It is the National Railway Company of Switzerland, which was founded back in 1902, and it was one of the very first European rail systems, which became known quite early on for its efficiency, for its safety, and also for its quality of service. Their B3 or 4 locomotive was introduced quite early in the company's history in 1905, when the first of 69 nice examples was built. The design was economical and also capable of fairly decent speeds for the time, I think around 45 miles an hour, which made them ideal for both passenger and freight use. When withdrawal time came, all members of the class, with the exception of one, which was number 1367, were withdrawn and scrapped. The remaining example is owned by the Heritage Foundation SBB. So there she is, the Swiss B3 for up close and personal for you. And I've now had a good chance to look at this up close and really take in a lot of the detail and take in a lot of the features. And I've got to say, I think this is a tremendous model. It's a beautiful locomotive, I think, in its own right. It's nicely proportioned and I think it looks quite elegant, hopefully even more so once it gets up and running. But also very clearly it is an insanely detailed locomotive. For instance, all of the pipework and such, all of the parts along the boiler, those are all separately fitted. So it is really quite a complex locomotive, which has its pros and its cons. Obviously on the plus side, it looks insanely detailed, as you can see. But on the downside, well, A, it's quite fragile. I mean, where do you hold this loco? Every part of this has fragile separately fitted parts. So I've been sort of holding it by the cylinders and also the side of the cab. You really have to be switched on when handling this model. That is the warning I will give. Yeah, one wrong move and this thing is going to crumble. And also several parts are quite loosely fitted, which isn't great either. I mean, this reverser rod, it's just plastic and it's very, very flimsy. So you seriously do have to take care. The other downside with the massive amount of complexity is that it makes the assembly process at the factory a little bit more challenging. And there is evidence, unfortunately, of that in the build quality. A lot of these pipes have visible glue on them, and around the other side there is a bit of a gluey mess where some of the parts are. So to an extent, the level of detail does this loco justice, but it also does the loco a bit of a disservice in other areas. But overall, it looks absolutely tremendous. Let's take a look at the level of detail and such then. So the decoration is fairly basic, but because of these sort of copper coloured pipes and the high shine valve gear and whatnot, it doesn't look like a plain black loco really, even though that's kind of what it is. But it does have one or two painted details. You've got the running number and some text on the side of the cab. I'll try and get a close-up on that so that you can read it. You've got this very, very nice, looks like a Westinghouse pump or some sort of condenser. That is a very fine piece and it's also been very intricately decorated. Also the coupling rods and the valve gear and whatnot, a lot of that has been painted, which is quite an interesting effect. Yeah, there's a black section in the middle of many of the rods, which again must have been quite a complex thing to do in the factory. Let's take a look at some of the other details then, and I warn you, there is quite a lot. So the lamps on the front, these do appear to be real working lamps. I don't know for sure whether these two on the left and right of the smoke box are. I mean, how are they wired in? I can't see any wires, yet there does seem to be an LED behind them. So if they actually work, I'm going to be quite bemused, I think, but hopefully they will. Great looking smoke box door on here as well. Very different to the locos I normally look at from the UK. Interesting smoke box door handle, little sort of turning wheel, quite a nice large lamp on it, also little separately fitted handrails. For a small area of the model, there sure is quite a lot of detail here. The buffers are made of metal, but they are not sprung, unfortunately, but they are very, very fine, so I guess that kind of makes sense. The buffer beams themselves do have quite a bit of detail on them already, despite the ones that we received in the accessories bag. And then you've also got the coupling here, which is the European coupling. I believe it is fitted into a NEM socket though, and it is also a kinematic one, which unlike some of those dodgy Hornby kinematic couplings, seems to move very, very freely and smoothly, so that's awesome. As I've already said, the boiler is peppered with loads of different details. You've got a very finely moulded chimney here, quite a bit of pipe work, much of it is separately fitted. The safety valves here are just made of painted plastic, unfortunately, so it's not the most quality model in the world, although this assembly, I would sort of maybe call this a whistle. Yeah, I guess it probably is. That does appear to be made of metal, and that is slightly better quality, I would say. One downside is underneath the locomotive boiler there is visible text on a circuit board, which is unfortunate because that could have been avoided, couldn't it? But yeah, if you look at the loco at the right angle, you can see some letters and numbers there, which breaks the illusion very slightly. The running plate looks absolutely fantastic. It is just made of plastic, but the texture on there is just incredible. It's very, very fine. Truly does bring the model to life quite wonderfully. The wheels themselves appear to be cast metal wheels, I think, as most Bachmann wheels tend to be, and they are nicely blackened as well, although you can see the axles, but not to the point that they're distracting, I would say. The cab detail itself is very decent. As you can see, we've got good looking glazing, which is nice and flush, as you'd fully expect. Pre-fitted cab doors. There is a movable tender full plate, but since coupling the loco and tender together, that has become inaccessible now, so I can't demonstrate that. However, you can see that there is quite a bit of painted detail inside the cab, which is not always a given for locomotives outside of the UK, but this one certainly does have at least a degree of painted detail, which really helps the cab to stand out. So overall, I mean, there's a lot of detail on this loco. I can't possibly talk about it all, but hopefully that gives you a sense of how detailed the model is. Let's take a look at the tender then, which clearly I have coupled to the loco. It is as I thought. Yeah, it's quite an insecure connection in that there is no clip that holds the two together. But yeah, it does seem to be quite strong. I mean, it's not coming apart very, very easily. And I did try sort of gently tugging the tender away from the loco, and it didn't immediately uncouple. Does mean, of course, you're not going to be able to put loads of stress on that coupling, but it's not going to come apart too easily, at least not while it's new. And that's why I'm going to keep these coupled together as much as possible, because if you continuously couple and uncouple them, then obviously that connection is going to get looser and looser, and that's not what you want. Anyway, the tender itself is well detailed. As you can see, there's a fair amount of riveted detail on the side of it. The axle boxes are quite interesting because they've got these sort of little painted crosses on them, which I've never seen before. Is that an oiling point, perhaps, in real life? Anyway, yeah, it's an interesting effect. You've also got this, what looks like a gauge, just sort of painted onto the side of the tender. So does this have a water gauge that works like that? It's just an exposed needle? Maybe that's not what that is, I'm not sure, but it's quite interesting nevertheless. Around the back you've got quite a bit of detail as well. You've got these electric warning signs which look modern, don't they? With UK models, at least steam locomotives, if you see those warning signs, then that tells you that the loco is a little bit later on, because they didn't used to have the warning signs. So yeah, that's an interesting note. Running number printed on the back of the tender. These wire metal handrails, which are all over the model, they're all over the loco as well. Quite good quality, and even more lamps too. And they are really nicely made, those lamps. You've got the frame around the lens. Yeah, it's really, really cool. You've got what I assume is some sort of holder for a cover or a tarpaulin over the coal, which again is quite loosely fitted. But here's a really coal feature. The coal load is removable, but not in the way you might expect, because the entire bunker is actually free to be removed. and that exposes the 21-pin DCC decoder socket, which obviously gives you really easy access. So even though no doubt to access the inside of the tender or perhaps the inside of the loco is going to be really frustrating and painful, the thing that most people will need to do, that is accessing the DCC socket, is really nice and easy. It does beg the question though, what's the crushed coal for? Because obviously you can't just put the crushed coal all over the DCC socket because there's not enough of it and it would make a huge mess, and the coal doesn't remove from this piece either. So do you just sprinkle the coal dust over the existing coal? Yeah, it doesn't seem very well thought through, to be honest, but it was interesting, so I'll give them that. Anyway, that is a close look at this locomotive. It's incredibly detailed, that is for sure, but it's also quite fragile as a result, and the build quality is a little bit hit and miss in many cases. The weight is 230 grams, loco and tender, which is about the same as a Hornby J15, so that's a smaller loco actually, and it's also about the same as the Dapol D-Class, which is a similar size. So I think the weight is just about okay, but I will say it's a good job this loco has its die-cast boiler, because without that I think the loco would be getting a little bit too light. Incidentally, the finish on the boiler, really quite nice because it's made of metal. It shines with a nice satin gleam. At this point, is it worth the money? Well, at the RRP, this thing is getting on for £400. To me, that is a complete and utter rip-off. The quality should have been better for that, it should have been a heavier loco, and it should have been better designed when it came to the details and the way the loco and tender coupled together. For what I paid, I think it's more or less about right, £180. The level of detail, the features, the quality of the design seems about in line with other locos that cost that amount of money, even though it is arguably still on the expensive side. But I'm really interested in the performance, so we're going to go and take a look at the way this loco runs. I'll try and get eyes on the mechanism, although if it does involve damaging the loco, as it sometimes does, then I won't be disassembling this all the way, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, let's get started. So there she is, the Swiss B3/4 down onto the track. Such a fantastic looking model this. It really has a presence to it, doesn't it? Such a detailed model as well. Anyway, I've done the first performance test and the run-in, and I filmed that, so I'll show you that in just a second. Next, I did my usual disassembly to find out what the mechanism is like. And to sum things up to start with, the mechanism is definitely competent, it's got some good features to it. However, there is an error and also a couple of poor design choices in my opinion, which make the mechanism and accessing the mechanism a little bit worse than they ought to be. So let's get started with this. First of all, the pickup situation is okay. 4 of the 6 tender wheels have pickups, so the outer wheels all have power pickups on them, the centre wheels do not. The loco's driving wheels also have pickups on them, however, the rear set of wheels has traction tyres on it. A model that costs almost £400 RRP and it's got traction tyres on it. So you've got all of the disadvantages of traction tyres, plus the fact that the pickups on those wheels are effectively nullified. They're not going to do anything. So you've only really got just over half of the model's wheels effectively picking up, which is unfortunate. The front pony is also unsprung. It just relies on gravity to pull it down onto the track. Hopefully it is heavy enough so that it doesn't cause derailments. Removing the base keeper plate starts with the brake rigging, which actually wasn't fitted properly. This isn't me trying to remove it, this is me noticing that it's just sort of loose and flimsy. And I can't really see any way for it to fit on unless all of the clips have broken, I don't know. So maybe it's supposed to be like that, it does kind of stay in position, but it's very flimsy. The base keeper plate is held on with 3 screws, which you can remove, and then the base keeper plate is fully removable, which is awesome, so you can clean the pickups nicely, and it also gives you access to the bearings. The rear axle with the traction tyres on it, that is the drive, and then there are proper bearings on the wheel set, and even the centre axle has a bit of spring to it, which is quite interesting. Now the body removal is much harder than it should be. In terms of the body screws, the instructions clearly label this screw here as S1, right? Well, this is a base keeper plate screw. That doesn't have anything to do with the body. It's actually this screw behind it in this little hole that is the body screw. So that's a complete mistake as far as I can tell in the instructions. And obviously that's really, really bad. Not only does it show that Liliput don't know their own product, which is pretty embarrassing, but also people will follow these instructions to remove the body, and they're going to be trying to pull the body off thinking they've removed the correct screws, and they haven't. It's going to cause damage to the model. So, you know, instructions, they have to be correct, don't they? It seems silly to point it out, but unless instructions are correct, they're not much help. Anyway, once the body was off, here is the chassis. It's a very neat and tidy chassis, but the motor is very, very tiny and unsubstantial looking. There's plenty of space in this chassis and indeed in the body as well for a larger motor, possibly even one of the cordless motors that Bachmann usually use, but instead they've opted for this very, very small and, according to the performance, underpowered motor, which is unfortunate. It does have a flywheel though. And here you can see how the lamps work. There must be an LED somewhere inside the sort of chassis block, and there are these light channels which work a bit like fibre optics. The light will come up this stem here, bounce off this 45-degree angle, and then go out the front. Not sure how the lamps on the front work though, because you can't see a light channel for those, so that must be sort of in between the two lamps, but still it's very, very clever. It works wonderfully. And the gauging is okay at 14.3mm back to back on each axle, quite reliably, so that shouldn't cause any problems. So there you have it. The mechanism, overall it's okay, you know, it's got the bearings, decent pickups I suppose, but the flimsy motor and the traction tyres do let this down in my opinion, and they're not at all appropriate on a model that is this expensive, even at the heavily discounted price that I paid. Either way, never mind, let's move on and I'll show you what happened during the performance test. Alright then, moment of truth. I really, really hope that this loco just works properly without causing any problems, because it's really frustrating having to troubleshoot such fragile locos as this, because it's so easy to damage them. I also hope that I've correctly understood the instructions and that this will work properly straight away on DC. I don't have to do anything, hopefully, to convert it to DC from AC. Anyway, let's find out. Let's see what the answer to all of those hopes and dreams is. Forwards direction, let's give it some juice. Oh, okay, it's working. It was a very rough start, but it does seem as though the loco is working quite noisily. And oh my goodness, there are working lamps. I don't know how they work. They only work in forwards direction, but yeah, we've got, I think they're probably fibre optic, aren't they? So the LEDs are probably situated elsewhere. Still, the effect is there, and that's absolutely tremendous. And then in reverse, you do get lights coming on inside the tender as well. So there are 5 lights on this loco. That's something that you don't tend to get with British models. So that's awesome. Right, how is the speed? Let's do a run past at 50% on the controller. Wait for it. That isn't 50. Ready? 50%. So I think that's fairly sensible, and of course it can go faster. Bear in mind, 45 miles an hour or thereabouts, that's about the maximum for these in real life. And I don't think this is too bad. No, it's not racing along at ludicrously high speed. So yeah, I don't think that's too bad. It's not very smooth, I have to say. Let's try it forwards. Yes, it's okay forwards. Not very smooth in reverse though, let me show you that. Yeah, seems to reach a tight spot each time the wheels rotate. But it's not been running yet, so hopefully that will improve. I'm also satisfied that this is well lubricated because, well, there was oil all over, at least the tender, when I first unpacked this. So yeah, there's definitely oil present. But without running in, let's just see what the crawl is like to get a sense. I have noticed the flywheel action already. When you cut the loco off, it gradually decelerates. That wasn't very good. It started to crawl well and then took off. So I think this will really, really need a run in. Yeah, I didn't touch the controller there. Crawling excellently, and then it sort of takes off. I've now got my hand away from the controller. So I would say that's an amazing crawl, but really it's just struggling against a tight spot, I guess, and then it suddenly speeds up like that, and then slows back down to the what would be a wonderful crawl if it was supposed to be crawling. I think there's definitely some work to do during the running in, because right now this is, even at a £180 price tag, this loco is not performing the way you'd expect. Yeah, it's not up there, is it? So yeah, I'm gonna run it in, I guess. See if we can get it back in shot. Yeah, it does. It keeps sort of stalling and such. It's not brilliant, really. So yeah, let's get it running. Let's see how it handles the layout. Hopefully that front pony truck isn't going to cause problems because it is kind of all over the place. Yeah, hopefully this is a stable loco. Otherwise, I'm going to be cross because this did cost me a lot of money. Okay, 50%. Here we go. All right. So far, so good. Let's not speak too soon. Still on the track. That's good. The tighter second radius there. If a front pony is going to derail, it will normally do it there. So that's a good sign. It does seem to be okay at the higher speeds there. I don't know if it's a torque issue or just a stickiness because it's not being run in issue. I don't know what it is, but at the slow speeds, it's not up there, really. It's not performing as you'd expect a 360-pound RRP loco to perform. Nor is it performing as you'd expect a 180-pound locomotive to perform, but it has got 60 minutes of running in ahead of it. Hopefully it will make the most of those 60 minutes, and hopefully when we come back, it will be running better than you have ever seen a locomotive run on this channel before, because I'm pretty sure this has the highest RRP of any loco I've ever run on this channel before. So no pressure, little B3, B4, whatever you are. Yeah, good luck. I'll see you shortly, folks. Okay, there we go. So everything makes sense now. Yeah, I can now tell why this loco is not great at the low speed. I suspect that's probably because of the very weak motor. Yeah, it doesn't seem like a decent enough motor for a model of this size, that's for sure. And also I can tell you that the wheel set is completely free. I was able to turn it manually and there are no tight spots or anything besides the sort of lack of balance due to the coupling rods and the valve gear. But a good model should have a motor that is strong enough to compensate for and overcome that. And also you can tell that there is no stiffness in the mechanism because that flywheel really carries the model along. If I cut it out now, you can see it slows down and decelerates quite gradually. So if this is going to get a good mark on performance, it will now have to be running perfectly because it's had its 1 hour run in. So let's see if that's the case. There we go. Let's see if I can get a crawl out of it to start with. So there we go. So to start with, that is looking like a really, really good crawl, nice and smooth. But as you can see, it's now going a lot faster and now it's stuck again. Wasn't touching the controller for any of that. Is it stalled? Oh, no, it's just slowly turning. So, yeah, I really do think it's just the motor unable to move the thing. Really, it's quite a heavy loco, die-cast boiler, such a tiny motor with a flywheel on it. I just don't think it's up to it. Yeah, let's try it backwards. Yeah, it just seems to get stuck. And like I say, when you're turning these wheels manually, obviously not by the wheels, you mustn't do that. It even says that in the instructions. But you can tell there is no noticeable tight spot there. So I do suspect it's the motor. And also, if I stop the loco running, you can see there's just absolutely no torque at all there. See that? Could be that the motor is just faulty. Could be, but I've no way of knowing that. I guess if you've got one of these and you run it on analog, let me know if yours runs the same as this. I suppose manufacturing tolerances mean that different models might perform slightly differently, but there's nothing I can do besides review the example I've got, and it's not brilliant. But at the higher speeds it is fine, I must say. The run-in went in without a problem, it didn't ever derail, slows down slightly on the curves, but it didn't cut out on the points or anything like that. It's just at the lower speeds, it's really not a good runner. Let's try it at this speed. See, even at this speed, it does momentarily stop, as though it's having trouble turning its wheels. So, yeah, for the price, it's just ludicrously bad. This should be an absolutely spot-on runner, and sadly it isn't. The pulling power, to say this has got traction tyres and to say it's quite heavy, is not that great. 0.36 newtons, that's around 23 coaches on straight and level track. Any loco with traction tyres, you would expect to be much more powerful than that. So again, that goes to show how underpowered the motor is. Anyway, I've set up some freight, not a massive train of it this time because this is an early loco. I don't really think they were intended to haul massively long trains. I could be wrong, like I say, didn't find a lot of info on these. Again, begs the question why the traction tyre was necessary. because really it needs a more powerful motor to become a good hauler. And if it had that, I think the weight of the Loco would be enough to make it a decent hauler. So it's just a very strange design. Anyway, I haven't tried it hauling anything yet, so let's go and see if it can couple and see how it gets on. Ooh. Cool. As soon as it met that rolling stock, it basically stopped dead. That's crazy. Mind you, it does sort of kick in at a low speed on the controller. I mean, that's 30 there. And most Locos tend to be just above a crawl at that speed, but at the high speed it's not that fast, so I don't think it's a gearing issue. Again, all of this points to a torque issue. But it is moving the train, so that's something. I guess next I'll have to look and see how it performs on the curves. So I'm going to set it to about 40, which seems about right as a slow Loco, and we'll see how it gets on. On the middle line, I've got my only other Liliput locomotive, which is stalled. Come on now, you were working a minute ago. This one was actually a good runner. I don't know why it's having trouble now. Come on now. So this is that little, it's cutting out on the points. Can't remember now whether it did that or not before, but the performance itself is good. Obviously it's just got such a tiny wheelbase that it struggles on points. Might be better, I suppose, once it's warmed up. But yeah, I've got to say, kind of similar, really, in that it's an extremely expensive locomotive, but not really remarkable enough to justify that expense. But yeah, at least this one is a more powerful runner. Well, I mean, it's not. It's obviously a much weaker Loco, but doesn't have torque issues at least. And then on the inside line, I sincerely apologise in advance for this, but I'm not that heavy on European Locos, so I don't have that many to choose from. So I've gone with this utter beast of a monstrosity. I should probably glaze over this as quickly as possible so I won't stop it, and I don't think I've put one of these wagons on properly. There we go. Right, so the B3/4, that's probably a good way to name it. It's managed a lap, so that's good. This time though, let's observe the lap and see how it performs. So it's a very small train behind this, which should be easy for basically any Loco. So let's see. Yeah, even this short train has amplified the slowdown on that curve, which again points to the torque issues. So it's a difficult conclusion, isn't it? Because obviously it's an incredibly detailed locomotive and it looks superb. So to an extent you can understand why this would have to be quite an expensive model. However, the performance just does not match in any way the price that I paid for this. That's the price I paid, by the way, $180. That was heavily reduced. That was in the sale, as I understand it. The normal price, if you buy this out in Europe or whatever, it's much more expensive than that. And so, frankly, the model just does not live up to that price. And I do feel that a lot of Bachmann's British models are rip-offs. They're far more expensive than they ought to be, but not as bad as this. Going on this, they're ripping off their European customers far, far worse. And you do hear quite a lot about that. I hear European viewers say, yeah, European models, they are a lot more expensive, but they also say that that expense is reflected in the quality and the performance. And I suspect with many European brands that is the case, but with this, it is not. This is really, besides the extra details, it's pretty much a standard Bachmann Loco at almost twice the price you would expect. So, in some ways very impressive. I do like the lights and the level of detail, as I say, but the way the Loco performs is just not up to the mark. Not for £180 and certainly not for almost double that. Let's have some ratings then for the Liliput SBB B3/4 locomotive. Some aspects of this model are mediocre in my opinion, particularly given how ludicrously overpriced this is at its full price. However, the level of detail is anything but mediocre, so I've given it 5-star. Absolutely crazy, really. So many separately fitted parts, cab detail, working lamps, and lots of them as well, like I say, 5 working lamps. Excellent decoration, great finish because of the die-cast boiler. The level of detail you can't fault. It's an incredibly detailed Loco. Performance though, I've had to give it 3-star. At the higher speeds it's relatively smooth, if you ignore the slight torque issues around the tighter curves, but yeah, it's okay. At the lower speeds though, it really struggles. I mean, it can't really do much of a crawl. And this loco wasn't that fast in real life. 45 miles an hour was about the maximum, so you're going to want to run this fairly slow, and it's not very good at that. There's also very little torque in the mechanism as well, I suspect because of the puny motor. The pulling power then, 23 coaches, that would have been quite good without the traction tyre, but with a traction tyre I would expect it to be much more powerful than that, which again goes to show how relatively weak this motor is. That said, it's not that bad. I mean, it's quite a heavy loco and it does have the traction tyre, so it's matching a Hornby King or a Bachmann ROD 280, but again, those locos do not have traction tyres. The mechanism then, I've given 3-star. It does lose a mark for traction tyres because I don't think they're any substitute for a good heavy loco. And it's confusing in this case because the loco is fairly good and heavy, would have been a perfectly good puller without the traction tyres and with a better motor, I think anyway. But the motor does have a flywheel, there are proper bearings on the axles, and the loco is pretty serviceable, so it's got that going for it. The quality I've given 4-star. Generally the build quality is okay. I did spot a few glue marks, not as many as you might expect given how detailed this is, but it has to lose like half a mark for that. And it also loses half a mark for just how fragile it is. Quite a lot of loose parts, some of them not fitted all that well. This isn't a massive issue, and actually it's less fragile than I initially thought, but yeah, you have to be careful with the way you handle it. Okay, value for money then. I've given this 2-star, which if anything I think is quite generous. I paid £180 for this, which I think is about a 3-star. It's not a bargain, but you can understand why it would be relatively expensive. But at £357.95, which is the lowest price for one of these on Bachmann's website, that's got to be a 1-star. I don't understand where they pulled that price from. Probably somewhere dark, hairy, and relatively smelly. Anyway, let's move on very quickly. 6.89 out of 10. With better performance and a better price tag, this would have been a much higher scoring loco, but as it is, let's put it into the logbook, and it is 18th place above Gladstone and below the Ruston 48. Yeah, unfortunately, a high price set expectations for this model which were not met. So there you have it then, folks. That is my review of the Liliput 3/4 locomotive. Yeah. I think this loco needed to be something very, very special across the board. And frankly, it just isn't that. Not impressive enough to justify the price, unfortunately. Having said that, at the higher speeds, it is perfectly acceptable. Yeah, it's nice and smooth, seems to haul a train okay, except for on the tighter curves, although the instructions did specify a minimum recommended radius. But in order to be worth the money, this had to be outstanding in every area, and therefore some of the mediocrity that I've seen is just misplaced on this model. But if you can get it for 180 and you don't mind the issues that I've found, then I can totally recommend it. Yeah, it's acceptable for 180, I think. Not a bargain, not the greatest value loco in the world, but it is a very detailed model that runs okay, and so I guess for £180 it's at least acceptable. To be fair, I don't know how old this model is, I don't know how long it's been in its box, but it does seem to be quite modern, and I did buy it brand new. And it was also well lubricated, noticeably, so there's nothing more I could have done really to ensure that this ran well. Anyway, it's been interesting though, I've enjoyed it, a Swiss steam locomotive, it's a real first. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. Alright, cheers folks, take care.